Welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by OraSure Technologies and USA Mobile Drug Testing Houston. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings with minimal risk of tampering, and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Intercept Oral Fluid Testing Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today's presentation is approved for 1 credit hour of continuing education from HRCI and SAPAC for CSAPAs. Further information will be provided at the end of our presentation. Today's presentation is entitled Optimize Your Drug Testing ROI with Lab-Based Oral Fluid Testing and will be presented by Bill Current and Tona Tronson. Bill Current is the president of WFC & Associates, a national consulting firm that specializes in drug testing policy development and providing accurate and up-to-date state drug testing law information. He is the editor of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. He also publishes the e-newsletter State Drug Testing Laws Monthly. Mr. Current is the former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and served as vice president of consulting for a national third-party administrator of drug testing and background screening services. He founded WFC & Associates in 1998. He is the author or co-author of 10 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Drug Testing. He also administers the annual Drug Testing Industry Survey, now in its 16th year. Tona Tronson is the president and owner of USA Mobile Drug Testing of Houston. She has a background in business management, human resources, and youth mentorship for both nonprofit and profit companies. After seeing firsthand the impact of substance abuse in the workplace and within families, she chose to make it her mission to address the issue head-on with training and education designed to keep people working, productive, and healthy. She has expanded her USAMDT franchise to service the entire greater Houston area, opening a permanent office location in addition to providing mobile drug testing services. She also offers supervisor and employee training courses, recovery coaching services, DNA testing, and comprehensive background check services to assist companies in finding the right people for the job. She was recently named USAMDT Corporate's Top Producer of the Year for 2013. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Curran and Tona Tronson.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and it's a pleasure once again to be doing an OraSure webinar. I'd like to thank OraSure for providing these monthly webinars and making this information available to both the drug testing industry as well as companies and organizations that use drug testing services. And I'm really excited to be co-presenting today with Tona because she has a unique angle to all of this in that she's, in addition to sort of the really wide spectrum of services that she provides, she also provides mobile drug testing services and other services that are provided mobily. So she'll have a unique perspective on this issue, and I'm looking forward to her part of the presentation. We know that drug abuse is a problem in the United States. We're going to go through some statistics in a minute just to sort of lay the groundwork for today's presentation. And HR professionals, criminal justice professionals, treatment professionals, et cetera, they know that this is a problem. They deal with it on a day-to-day basis. And they also know that traditional urine testing programs are not without their challenges. And so lab-based oral fluid testing in particular, and throughout this presentation, I'm going to be referring mostly to lab-based oral fluid testing. There are some slides a little later on point of collection or instant result oral fluid testing, but mostly we're going to be talking about lab-based oral fluid testing. It provides an alternative. It's growing in popularity. There's some reasons for that, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It's legal in virtually every state. The federal government's even looking at adding it, is in the process of developing regulations to add it to the federal guidelines. And so there are a lot of reasons right now why lab-based oral fluid testing in particular is growing in popularity. Both drug testing providers and buyers of drug testing services are taking a real hard second look at oral fluid testing, and that's why, and it's growing in popularity in many different industries and throughout the world. In the United States, urine testing is still the number one most commonly used method, but in other countries, oral fluid testing is by far the most commonly used testing method, like in Australia, for example, where that is the preferred method of testing. So we're going to go through some statistics, develop sort of a groundwork by talking about the magnitude of the drug problem. Then we'll talk about lab-based oral fluid testing in particular. We'll go through some of the myths about oral fluid testing and lay out the truth when it comes to drug test cheating and detecting marijuana, collection issues, things of that nature. And then we'll go through the state laws. We'll do an overview of that. We'll talk about how to modify your drug testing program, your policy in particular, if you're considering switching to oral fluid testing. And then Tano will have a part of the presentation at that point, and then I'll come back in and discuss a formula for measuring the return on investment of lab-based oral fluid testing versus urine testing in particular. In the amount of time that we have, we won't be able to get into, say, hair testing or POCT oral fluid testing, but we'll talk about urine testing in particular. So to begin with, let's just set the groundwork here. So the federal government comes out with a study every year. It's the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. It's been in existence every year since the 1970s. It used to be called the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse. Now it's the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And it gives us a real clear idea of the levels of substance abuse in the United States. It breaks it down. If you go to the website and you take a look at it, you'll find statistics breaking it down by age, by gender, by geography, by the type of drug used, combining drug and alcohol. They even have statistics there on cigarette smoking as well. So it's a real good source to look to find information on an annual basis. And according to in the 2012 report, which comes out the following year, so this came out in 2013, the new survey has not come out yet, but it's going to come out soon. It's usually August, September timeframe. So it says 2012, but it came out in 2013. This is the latest data. There were nearly 24 million Americans, 12 and older, who admitted themselves during the survey, when they were surveyed, they admitted to being past month users, current users of illicit drugs. Now, it takes a lot to admit that over the phone to somebody who's representing the federal government and asking you questions about your illegal drug use habits. So these numbers could be a little bit low, right? I mean, if somebody calls you on something like that, if you're a drug user, you might be tempted not to tell the truth. But of those who did admit it, there were nearly 24 million who were current, which is a past month user of illicit drugs. That's 9.2% of the population 12 and older. And that's higher than it was back in the 2002 to 2008 time period when it was in the low 8%. Marijuana is really fueling that increase. It's the most commonly abused illicit drug in the United States. Nearly 19 million individuals using illicit or marijuana in the 12 and older age group. And about 2/3 of illicit drug users admit that they only used marijuana in the past month. So that's not only the drug that's fueling the increase in drug abuse, but it's also the drug of choice, and in many cases the exclusive drug of choice of many drug users. But there are people who use other drugs besides marijuana. And if you look to the bottom, the majority of these non-marijuana users in that third bullet there were actually abusing prescription drugs. They were quote-unquote non-medical users of psychotherapeutic drugs. We're talking about pain relievers, tranquilizers, stimulants, and sedatives. That's the other category that is really fueling this resurgence in drug abuse in the United States after many years of seeing the statistics sort of stabilize and even go down. Now over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we're seeing those numbers go up, and a lot of it is due to marijuana, but also the abuse of prescription drugs. So when you look at the chart that compares all the different drugs against each other, of course at the top that's everything, right? The 23.9 million. But marijuana, right there, number one, 18.9 million. And then the category of psychotherapeutic drugs, prescription drug abuse, is the number 2 drug abuse category. Then cocaine, then hallucinogens, inhalants, heroin, etc. Now, I point this out because for many years cocaine was always number 2. And I suppose in some places cocaine may be still the number 2 drug of abuse if you look at it from a geography standpoint. But when you throw it all together on a national level, the abuse of prescription drugs is the number 2 category of drug abuse behind only marijuana. And that's important to know. If you're an employer, for example, and you're in the business of trying to keep your workplace drug-free, you got to know what drugs people are using. Because if you're only testing for the traditional 5 drugs that the government requires, then you're missing people who are abusing benzodiazepines. You're missing people who are abusing barbiturates and perhaps other psychotherapeutic drugs. So this is an important chart to be aware of when you're putting your drug-free workplace program together. As it affects the workplace, it's interesting to know that the rate of current illicit drug use is higher among unemployed Americans than when you combine employed full-time and employed part-time and other categories together. But if you look at that last bullet, the second bullet there, 67.9, nearly 68% of illicit drug-using adults were employed, either full or part-time. So it really sort of blows away that stereotype that a drug abuser is someone who can't find a job to begin with. The majority of drug abusers are actually employed, full or part-time. So you need to know that, because if you're under the assumption that in your workplace you don't have any drug abusers, that's probably a false assumption, because there are a lot of drug abusers, and among the adult drug abusers, 68% of them are actually employed. And we know that drug testing works. It's become a powerful weapon in the war against drugs, and it's a way to help people, identify people who need help, or kind of push people into a corner a little bit if they won't accept the help. Drug testing has proven to be a powerful weapon in the war on drugs. In fact, if you look at all the programs that the federal government has ever come out with on fighting drugs, you know, the Just Say No program and many of the others, and they all have their benefits and their strengths. But the one thing that has worked, and that has worked continually for many years now, is drug testing. From the time that the federal government began requiring employers to drug test safety-sensitive transportation workers, we've seen significant decreases in drug abuse in certain parts of the workplace. And you look, if you compare the positivity rates for the DOT industry, the Department of Transportation mandated drug testing, versus the non-mandated drug testing that goes on, the positivity rates are lower under DOT. Why is that? Well, because it's not that people aren't using drugs, or that the drug testing methods aren't working. It's because it deters drug use. Fewer people are using drugs. And once they catch on to certain ways that the company does drug testing in these non-mandated areas, they want to cheat on it. They find ways to sort of cheat the system. And so urine testing is very susceptible to drug test cheating methods, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the myths of oral fluid testing and how they compare to urine testing. For example, and I run into this all the time, despite the fact that lab-based oral fluid testing has been around for more than a decade in the workplace market, there are people who still think that oral fluid testing is inaccurate. It just doesn't provide an accurate result, or that the window of detection is too short, or that you can't detect marijuana with oral fluid testing. And that oral fluid testing is just like urine. It can be cheated on just like urine testing can be. We're going to go through these 4 primary myths. There are others as well, but these are the 4 that usually get in the way and start to sort of create a false impression of what oral fluid testing really is. And again, let me emphasize, we're talking about lab-based oral fluid testing. It's a whole different ballgame, a whole different technology and science behind instant result or point of collection oral fluid testing. And I've got a couple of slides coming up on that. So the presence of drugs in oral fluid, in a saliva specimen, is related to the amount of the drug, whatever drug we're talking about, that's in the bloodstream of the individual at the time that the saliva sample is collected. So scientists, the really smart people in the drug testing industry, will tell you that oral fluid mimics blood, and that blood is the gold standard from a scientific standpoint if you want to detect the presence of drugs in somebody's system. And oral fluid mimics blood. It's like a blood equivalent, or it will produce a blood equivalent result. And part of the reason for that is that with oral fluid, you're going to be able to test for both the parent drug and its metabolite. With urine testing, you're detecting the metabolite of the drug. But with oral fluid testing, lab-based oral fluid testing, you're able to detect both the parent and the metabolite. And this makes it possible to actually get a very tighter start to the window of detection. When it comes to, and I've got a slide coming up on that is going to show when the window of detection starts with oral fluid testing compared to the other testing methods, especially urine testing. But before I go to that, let me just advise you that if you're considering any drug testing method at all, if you want to really get a clear idea about how accurate that testing method is, whether it's a device that somebody's trying to sell you or you're thinking about switching from urine to oral fluid, you want to make sure that the provider or the source of the product can produce independent empirical data from peer-reviewed journals that show that the accuracy claims that are in this company's package insert, for example, are accurate. It's not just based on marketing materials, but it comes from independent sources. It's peer-reviewed journals that have looked at the technology, they've studied it, they've compared it to other testing methods, and the accuracy can be backed up from independent sources. A good provider is going to be able to produce that for you. It's not just going to be marketing material. As great as marketing materials can be, and that's what I'm in the business of producing, is marketing materials, you want to look for independent empirical data. And you want to look for certain types of clearances and certifications. For example, you want an oral fluid collection device that has been cleared by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. It's FDA cleared. That's the term that you're looking for, FDA cleared or FDA clearance, not only for the collection device, but for the assays as well, the actual drugs that you're going to test for in the laboratory. If you see a long list of 15 or 16 or 20 drugs that supposedly this testing method or X testing method or Y testing method can detect, that's good. Of course, you want, bigger panels are the way that we're going in the drug testing industry today. But it's also important to ask which of those assays are cleared by the FDA. So the number of assays is one thing, but the number of assays that have been cleared, the testing system, if you will, okay? And you want to deal with a laboratory, or you want the oral fluid testing to take place at a laboratory that has some type of certification. Now, the federal government has a certification that comes out from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, but that certification right now, until those oral fluid regulations come out, right now it only applies to urine testing. But nonetheless, working with a SAMHSA or a CAP, which is the College of American Pathologists certified laboratory, gives you a little bit of assurance that the laboratory itself follows certain quality guidelines. And so you want to deal with a laboratory that follows certain guidelines, that has certain types of certifications, and you want to use a device that's FDA cleared and test with assays that are FDA cleared as well. Doesn't hurt for the provider to be able to produce a good list of satisfied customers that are in your field. Do your own internal research with the product. Put the package insert to the test. Ask for some samples of the product so that you can actually use it, and then put it to the test. Find out if it's easy to use. What's the usability of the product? How easy is it to use, to package it, to send it to a laboratory, things of that nature. And then what are the results that you're getting back? You really have to know who you're doing business with as well as what you're using. And so the only way you can do that really is to put it to the test and try out the product. Okay, now I told you we talk about window of detection and whether or not it's too short. It's not a question of whether it's too short, it's what can you detect accurately within the window of detection, and does that meet your needs? The window of detection with oral fluid testing is shorter than with urine or with hair. I'm going to show you a chart on the next slide that's going to show you this, okay? But if you're concerned, again, about accuracy and the positivity rates that you're going to get, you need to understand that with oral fluid testing, that window of detection is going to open up almost immediately after the individual has used drugs. Whereas even with urine testing, the most common testing method, which is a good testing method, right? When done right, it's a good testing method. But that window of detection is not going to start right away. It's going to be an hour or longer before you can detect the drug in the person's system with a urine sample versus oral fluid, where you're going to be able to detect the drug in the person's system almost immediately after they use the drug. Now, every drug has its own unique window of detection, and every specimen has its own ability to show you the presence of drug in that specimen. So here's the chart. You can see on the far left, you've got a blue and a red line That's blood and oral fluid. And that black line on the left, that vertical black line, is when the person used drugs. So the blue and the red, the blood and the oral fluid, start right after the individual used the drugs. The yellow line, which stands for urine, is some period of time a little bit farther to the right. It's an hour, it's an hour and a half, it's 2 hours, whatever it is, depending on the drugs. It's not immediately after usage. Now, as you look to the right of the chart, as you sort of scan to the right, you can see with blood and oral fluid, it's going to go out for a period of some day or days, but urine is going to go farther out. Now, hair, just so you know, you're not going to see that window of detection open up with hair for several days after usage, usually going to be about a week or so. But the real advantage to hair testing is that window of detection goes way out there, about 90 days. So it depends on what you're looking for. Because drugs can be detected in a person's system with an oral fluid sample immediately within minutes of using the drug, it makes for a great recent use detector. So if you're conducting post-accident testing, for example, or reasonable suspicion testing, oral fluid is ideal for that. It could be ideal for random testing as well, or pre-employment testing, but the window of detection, because it opens up so soon after usage, makes it ideal for certain situations like post-accident and reasonable suspicion. The same is true of blood, but blood is impractical, and by some state laws not permitted in the workplace for drug testing. But oral fluid, which mimics blood in terms of its ability to detect both the parent and the metabolite of the drug, is ideal. It has that same quality as blood in terms of accuracy, but you're not dealing with blood, of course. Now, positivity rates. Remember, the window of detection starts immediately after usage with oral fluid, but it's going to end a little sooner than with urine. So you're going to get some positives on the front end of that window of detection, especially with reasonable suspicion and post-accident testing, that you would miss with urine testing, certainly with hair, but you're possibly going to miss some on the back end of the window of detection with oral fluid that you'll catch with urine. But overall, the positivity rate between oral fluid testing and urine testing is very, very similar. That middle column there, where it says intercept at the top of the column, represents lab-based oral fluid testing. And to the right of it is urine testing. So you can see the overall positivity rate, 4.1 for lab-based oral fluid testing versus 4.4 for urine testing, very similar. Scan down to about the fourth bar there, you can see THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, the positivity rate is actually higher with lab-based oral fluid testing at 2.5 than it is with urine testing at 2.3. And if you scan down into the small print there at the bottom, you can see that this study was based on over 4.5 million lab-based oral fluid tests. So this wasn't just a small sample, but this was a large sample over a period of time, and it shows that the positivity rate for lab-based oral fluid testing, in this case using the OraSure Intercept device, is very, very similar to urine testing. So from a positivity standpoint, you're not really sacrificing anything when it comes to switching from urine to oral fluid. Now today, of course, the big issue that everybody's concerned about is marijuana, because there's so many states that are passing legalized marijuana laws. And the question is, can you detect marijuana in an oral fluid sample? And the answer is yes. There's more to it than that, but the answer is yes. There's a big difference, as I said earlier, between the technology of lab-based oral fluid testing and the technology behind point of collection or instant result, the disposable devices, oral fluid testing. And that's because there's differences in the cutoff levels that are used in order to be able to detect marijuana. The sensitivity and the specificity of detecting marijuana in a oral fluid sample that goes to a laboratory versus an oral fluid sample that's being tested with an instant result device. And so that's a very important thing to know, because the cutoff level with POCT, the instant devices, is usually going to be considerably higher than what a lab is capable of detecting in the laboratory. In fact, I've got a chart that shows the positivity rates at different cutoff levels. So that red vertical dotted line there comes down at the 50 nanogram mark on this chart. And so those blue bars represent numbers of positives at those cutoff levels. And you can see that the majority, in fact, the vast majority, 80% of THC positives in oral fluid testing are below 50 nanograms. So if you're using an instant testing device, for example, that's got a cutoff level of 50 nanograms per milliliter, you could possibly miss a lot of potential positives, because as you can see, the vast majority of those positives are far to the left of that red dotted line. In fact, the majority of them are between 5 nanograms per milliliter and 10 or 20, maybe 25 nanograms per milliliter. The vast majority of positives can be detected in oral fluid, but it's the sensitivity of lab-based oral fluid testing, the technology of lab-based oral fluid testing, that makes it possible to accurately detect THC at those lower cutoff levels. If you're using a device with a cutoff level of, say, 35, 40, certainly 50 or above, you're going to miss a lot of the positives. Everything that's to the left of that red bar, you're going to miss with the device with a cutoff level above, say, 40 or 50 nanograms per milliliter. That's important to know. A POCT oral fluid device may still be what you need for your circumstances. You just need to know what you're getting, especially in this day and age when marijuana is such a touchy, sensitive issue. The nice thing about lab-based oral fluid testing in this instance is that it's got that recent use ability, the ability to detect recent use. And so even in states where marijuana is legal, at least for medical purposes or recreationally in Colorado and Washington, it's really hard for a user to argue that they were using marijuana on Friday night, let's say, or even Saturday, and then come to work and test positive on Tuesday, and then claim that the usage was from Saturday. It's just not really going to wash well when it comes to oral fluid testing, especially lab-based oral fluid testing. If they test positive Tuesday afternoon with an lab-based oral fluid test, it means that they were using drugs within a day and maybe even within hours of when that collection took place. It really makes lab-based oral fluid testing an ideal medium in states where marijuana is legal. Now, the whole cheating issue, we'll just take a few minutes on this so that we can get to Tana's part. But drug testing cheating is an issue when it comes to urine testing. There's just no doubt about that. It's become a cottage industry. You can go on the internet, type in "beat the drug test" in a Google search, and you're going to get over 7 million hits. 7 million websites are going to come up that are offering advice, offering products, some tips or whatever on how to beat your urine test. Oral fluid testing, on the other hand, very difficult to adulterate. All the common testing methods that are used to cheat on a urine test simply do not work with oral fluid testing. You can't really put bleach in your mouth and bleach out the presence of the drug in your saliva. You can drop a little bit of bleach into a urine sample, and it's going to adulterate that urine sample, and the lab may be able to detect that it's unfit for testing, and the labs are really good at this nowadays with urine samples. But there's still going to be something irregular that's going on. It's going to put the employer in a position where they have to take the action based on an unfit specimen rather than on a positive or negative result. Now, when it comes to cheating, websites don't ignore oral fluid testing. They just don't really have any good advice. For example, on one website it says, try to avoid the test. Avoid submitting your saliva. And then on another website it said, between certain periods of time, you must avoid being screened or you will surely test positive. I have another one that I wasn't able to get onto a slide in time for today, but the advice was buy our mouthwash and stop using drugs for at least 24 hours before providing a sample, and you're almost always going to pass that test. I thought, perfect advice. Stop using drugs, and just to be safe, rinse your mouth out with this mouthwash, but stop using drugs first, and you're going to pass that drug test. That's really the best advice anybody can come up with when it comes to cheating on a saliva test. Just don't give them your saliva, but if you don't have any way out of the test, try to put the swab in the wrong place in the mouth so you don't give them a good sample to work with, or better yet, just stop using drugs. Well, that's our objective anyways, right, with our drug testing and our drug-free workplace programs. Now, one of the questions I get asked a lot about is state drug testing laws. And the states that are on this map in blue and gray are the places where you can do oral fluid testing. There's really only 3 states, Maine, Vermont, and Hawaii, that don't allow oral fluid testing generally. The other 47 states, minus the territory of Puerto Rico, allow oral fluid testing. So this idea, and I've heard people say this, that oral fluid testing is illegal. It's not illegal. There are some states that don't allow it, like these three, and there are some states that don't allow POCT testing, or that limit POCT testing, the use of instant result devices, to FDA-cleared products. And so you would have to use an FDA-cleared oral fluid device, which I only know of one of them that's in existence. Or you just not use POCT. There are some states, I think this, let me see, this next slide I think shows it. Yes, these are the states that don't allow the use of instant testing devices. So you have the list before that limits POCT testing to FDA-cleared devices, and then you have this list where they just don't allow it, or they make it so impossible, like in New York, that a typical employer couldn't use a POCT device and be in compliance with the state law. There are states with voluntary laws, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky. There are states with mandatory laws, like Connecticut, for example, where if you're going to do drug testing in Connecticut, you must follow the law. And then there are states like Florida, where I live, where the law is voluntary. It's a particular type of law that offers a workers' compensation premium discount if my company does drug testing. But if I want to get in that program, I have to agree to drug test the way the state provides these guidelines for. Well, outside of those guidelines in states like Florida and Tennessee and Ohio and Georgia, etc., outside of those voluntary programs, I'm not limited by the standards of that voluntary law. But if I'm in that program, then I do have to comply with them. And among those states with voluntary laws, these red ones here, Alaska, Florida, Mississippi, Ohio, South Dakota, and Tennessee, require urine testing. It's not so much that they prohibit oral fluid testing, but they very specifically require urine testing in these voluntary state laws. But if I'm an employer here in Florida, which I am, and I'm not in the workers' comp premium discount program, which I'm not, then I don't have to comply with the standards of that voluntary law. In other words, I can do oral fluid testing here in Florida, as I could in Tennessee or in any one of these other states. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, the federal government is in the process of developing regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing. And so there's going to come a time in the near future when SAMHSA allows lab-based oral fluid testing for federal employees who are part of federal drug testing programs. And the U.S. Department of Transportation has already signaled that once those regulations are in place, it will work toward adopting them for the DOT regulations. Once they become part of 49 CFR Part 40, then DOT will be moving to alter its regulations, which of course are based on Part 40, to allow lab-based oral fluid testing in DOT mandated programs as well. That's spurring a lot of interest in lab-based oral fluid testing generally, and so we're starting to see employers in the non-mandated arena already starting to look at, and in many cases and in many industries, adopt lab-based oral fluid testing. If you're going to do that, there's some things that you need to keep in mind. One, you want to make sure that you check the laws. We just went through a whole bunch of, maps that showed red states and blue states and gray states. You want to make sure that your state allows oral fluid testing, and you need to understand that the other legal requirements applicable to drug testing apply to oral fluid testing just like they do traditionally to urine testing. So modify your policy to reflect lab-based oral fluid testing and make sure that you leave the other types of requirements in there, whether it has to do with how you report results or the paperwork that's required or where a collection can take place or if a split specimen is required, etc. Make sure that your policy not only reflects that you've switched to lab-based oral fluid testing, but that these other state-mandated requirements are in your policy still. They don't go away just because you switch to oral fluid testing. Now, some states like Georgia, they have more detail on how oral fluid testing can take place in that state. But most states have just simply allowed oral fluid testing, and they haven't modified any of the other requirements based on urine testing from original versions of the law. Of course, you want to make sure you're dealing with a lab that's equipped to conduct oral fluid tests, as we talked about earlier. You want to make sure your medical review officer is prepared to review oral fluid samples, the results from oral fluid samples, etc. And then you want to notify your employees. You want to teach them what oral fluid testing can do. They may be thinking some of these myths about oral fluid testing apply. You want to disavow them of any of those notions and make sure they understand that you're using a reputable, accurate drug testing method that's legal in your state. And then train your supervisors. Help them understand how oral fluid testing is going to take place in your company. One of the great things about oral fluid testing is that the collection process is so simple that you can train employees in the company to conduct the collection, and if it makes sense for your company, not use professional technicians to do that. Now, sometimes, and in many cases, that's still going to be the way you want to go. You're still going to want to use a professional to conduct that test. There's just some security about that, and Tana's going to talk about that in a minute, about the service that she provides. You want to make sure that you're making smart decisions for your company before you launch your new program. Now, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Tana now, and she's going to take you through a little bit of sort of the practical day-to-day stuff that she's been involved in running her USA Mobile Drug Testing company in Houston. And then after she's done, we'll talk a little bit more about the return on investment formula for lab-based oral fluid testing. So Tana, I'll turn the microphone over to you. And Tana, you may have your mute on your phone because we're not hearing you right now. Let me give Tana another minute to come on the line with her phone, which it's a series of companies throughout the country that specialize in mobile drug testing services. And so in some cases, they'll have a brick and mortar location. Other times, they're working out of their mobile testing units, providing drug testing, alcohol testing, wellness programs, physical things of that nature. So it's pretty broad, the type of services that they offer. And Tana, as Jessica mentioned at the very beginning, has the Houston area as her territory. And so she runs her program out of Houston and is actually one of many USA Mobile Drug Testing locations throughout the country. And so she'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. While we're waiting for Tana to come back on, let me maybe share the beginning part of the return on investment formula, which I think is really fascinating. And I've done this presentation, I've done this presentation on ROI to lots of different types of audiences, and I can compare lab-based oral fluid testing or lab-based urine testing or point of collection urine or oral fluid testing, hair testing, any number of ways. Usually, if I'm just doing a presentation just on return on investment, I'll start out with the return on investment of drug testing versus not drug testing. And when I first got into the drug testing business 25 years ago, can't believe it's been that long, but 25 years ago, that was the argument. Should we test or should we not test? And so the ROI that we used to demonstrate for people was the ROI of drug testing. And it always worked, no matter what numbers you plugged in. The return on investment from a drug testing program always made sense versus not having it programmed. So you want to make sure that as you talk about return on investment, or as you're trying to measure or estimate return on investment, if you're an end user, a buyer of drug testing, that you're comparing all the right elements of the type of drug testing that you're doing. So what I've done with these charts, and Tana, as soon as you're on, just let me know, because I see she's coming into the system. Let me know, and I can pause where I'm at. We'll go to your part of the presentation. But you want to put all the elements in. So there's the collection of the specimen. There's the laboratory analysis of the specimen. The confirmation of an initial screen positive, we refer to as a non-negative. In the screening process, it comes back, it's positive or not a negative, so it then is confirmed with, typically with gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS. And then the medical review officer part of the equation, or the components of a drug test, because all of them cost something. Even if your provider is bundling everything together, there's a cost associated with each one of those, and with each one of these components. And added up, it becomes the price of the drug test. So look at drug testing based on all of those components. And that's particularly important because when you're comparing one testing method to another, some of those components come into play and some of them don't, or some of them are more expensive with one testing method versus another one. So in this particular chart, we're going to compare lab-based urine testing with lab-based oral fluid testing. And what I've done is under the urine testing, I put a collection price. Under oral fluid testing, I left that zero. There could be a cost associated with it, and often there is, but I left that off for the time being. With the urine testing, I took $15. If you're using a patient service center with one of the major labs, maybe it's $10 to $12. If you're using a third-party collector, it could be $15 to $25 or more. And again, Tana, as soon as you come on, just let me know, and I can pause where I'm at.
Poor Tana.
So, are you there, Tana? Okay, we're still waiting for Tana. The price that an end user pays for collection.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Yay! Sorry, Bill. And now I'm on. So.
Okay. Well, let's pause where I'm at with the ROI, and I'll come back to it at the end. But as I was telling the audience, Tana, you're with USA Mobile Drug Testing of Houston. I explained the really sort of a broad spectrum of services that you provide. But if you'd like to start there and then just tell them some of your experiences with oral fluid testing, that'd be a great place to start.
Sounds good. Well, I started with oral fluid testing a couple of years back when, in a bigger way than I had prior, when a client came to me and said, we do over 2,000 random drug tests a year. They are required to be observed. We are tired of the wait time that is associated with urine testing. It's done at the port, so we'd either have to get a big bus to come that could do, or a van that could do urine testing on site. They had all these different issues, and they had all these different requirements. And they wanted something that was cleaner, that was, more in the immediate result. They didn't care if they do care, but they're basically like, look, if they were smoking marijuana on the weekend, they're going to do that. But when they're at work, they need to be clean. And so we hear that oral fluid is like the way to go for all of our different issues and all of our different thoughts. So we started doing a lot of research and providing them with information. We found the intercept and started doing oral fluid testing. Now we do over 2,000 a year with them, and in all kinds of different ways. So, this is a group of predominantly men that are workers at the Port of Houston and all up and down the Gulf Coast. So we'll go in for a post-accident situation. We can do it in the vehicle. We can do it in a small room area. It's easy and it's quick. It's required to be observed, so it doesn't matter if you have a female or male collector, because you can get your collection done immediately. We do a quick breath alcohol. It's very hard to adulterate, especially we have a protocol where we use a 10-minute wait time and before we're willing to do the test, the oral fluid test. And then, during that time, especially if it's a post-accident reasonable suspicion, you're usually doing a breath alcohol test anyway, and you're filling out your chain of custody. So it works out incredibly well. And, they always talk about how when you do oral fluid, you're losing out on the marijuana positives and all of that. Well, that's not true. We get quite a few marijuana positives. About the same statistics as we got with urine, maybe a little bit higher rate of return on that, just because when there's reasonable suspicion and all of that, we end up catching them because it's an immediate effect. So that goes into, the white-collar world where you have a reasonable suspicion situation or a post-accident situation. We have a lot of law firms actually that call us, because what happens is it's very confidential. They're very concerned about, any form of ramifications of testing somebody for any reason, really. And it's a white-collar environment, so really the only time they do test is if it's a reasonable suspicion, often, because they're sitting in an office all day. And with oral fluid testing, we can come in completely under the radar, dressed in, business casual, walk into a conference room, close the door, do the test, less than 20 minutes later, we're out the door, and no one's the wiser of a drug test having been taken place. It's not like you have to go into a bathroom or you have to make any show of anything. One of the things that I like a lot about oral fluid testing is the direct observation aspect of it. When we're doing urine testing, we're always looking for temperature, color, and smell just to see if there's an adulteration that has happened, to see if something is done that shouldn't have been done. And then it's direct observation that's required since we do follow DOT protocol. Even in our non-mandated testing, we follow DOT protocol for urine testing. And so oral fluid takes all of that out of it. It's an immediate thing. Not that I do very much believe there's still reason to do urine testing and hair testing and definitely have their place. But oral fluid testing is excellent for that. Dilute samples, I know many of you guys are employers and you need to have a stance on your dilute samples. In the several thousand oral fluid tests I've done, I've had one dilute sample. And so that's fantastic because you don't have to retest and all of that. It's very difficult to adulterate an oral fluid test. Very difficult, especially if you have a proper protocol where you have a wait time like we do. We definitely recommend that you wait 10 minutes prior to putting the oral fluid devices into their mouths, and then there's a 6-minute wait period. And we can do a split specimen. We always do split specimens for several of our clients, and the way we do that is we just have one oral fluid specimen device on either side of their cheek between their teeth and gums, and you have a sample if there is a rebuttal situation. So you're even covered there. The statistics show that marijuana has a 2.2% higher rate of positives than urine. So that is a great statistic because so many, whether it's a client or somebody else in my industry doing the drug testing, there's always the concern about being able to catch the marijuana users. Cheating is virtually impossible because you also put a 10-minute wait time in there. The one way that they can cheat is they can get those little gel capsules that you get at CVS or at Walgreens or any sort of pharmacy. They can put water in there, and then their sample can come back dilute. And the reality is that if you wait 10 minutes and you're watching them, you've got an eye on your donor, your employee, then that also doesn't work very well because those capsules dissolve. So protocol is very important when you're doing oral fluid testing. So we get asked a lot about oral fluid testing. So I've kind of gone through like the collector side and what the employer can, you're still protected with a split specimen sample so that you can retest if necessary. You can retest the same sample. You've got so many different aspects that are fantastic, especially in reasonable suspicion and post-accident situations. I had a client call me one day and said, "Hey, Tona, this person just really smells like marijuana. Can you get out here?" Well, we're typically out the door in 15 minutes and on our way, and, unless it's rush hour traffic in Houston, you're there. You can get pretty much anywhere within 45 minutes. And so we got there, and probably from that person's break until we tested them, it was less than an hour and 15 minutes. That wouldn't have shown up on a urine test. But it did show up, and the donor, the employee, was positive. So you got those kind of cases covered as well when it's an oral fluid test. It's great because it's also confidential. Nobody needs to know there's a drug test happening. Like I told you earlier about our law firms that call us or our white collar type of environments. It's also great when you're in an office building because you can't use the public restrooms. Buildings are kind of funny about not letting collectors take them over. So, they like for all of their tenants to be able to use a restroom when needed. So oral fluid testing is ideal for for those kind of situations as well. So there's quite a few, and there's all kinds of positives. Now, I'm not saying there's not a reason to do urine and hair testing. I would never say that, and breath alcohol tests as well. Those are all critical and used, and have their place. I've learned also that I like doing oral fluid for random testing, and we do that for our port account. But it's also handy in the white-collar environment. So we can tell you a lot of different stories about that. It also makes it easy when you're doing, groups, lots of people. We only do one collection at a time. We never test more than one person at a time. That's very important. That's part of your protocol. For those of you all that are employers, you want to make sure that your collectors have a very defined protocol in any type of testing they do. And one of them is that our large client was like, Tona, you can do 4 collections at a time. You just start them a minute off. And I was like, no, we do one collection at a time. One collector, one donor. But you can still get a lot done because you have them, their wait time will work out. So you can stagger them. You don't have to take everybody off a manufacturing floor or out of the workplace, because even though we've had situations with urine testing that somebody's disappeared like for less than 5 minutes and they have an off-temperature sample. Well, in this case, everybody in the building can know that you're going to do oral fluid testing, because they're going to have a very, very hard time adulterating it. And they can't put a different sample in their mouth. So whereas urine testing, those are both options or potential problems for you. So with a urine test, oral fluid, you can easily just allow them to go keep working and go get them and say, hey, it's your turn, and you will have them wait the 10 minutes, and then you do their test. So it can be staggered. So your rate of return, your ROI on oral fluid testing is even higher, because we always recommend in urine testing that you bring everybody into a room, and then they have to wait as people give their samples. Well, oral fluid, they can continue to work. So there's all kinds of positives with oral fluid testing when it comes to the collection aspect. We know that the science of it is also getting better and better. It's already there, but SAMHSA is looking at certifying it so that it'll be SAMHSA certified, so that we can also potentially use it with the DOT, and so that'll bring it into the federal regulations, which will be fantastic, and it'll cover that. So I think there's lots and lots of positives on both the collector side, the scientific side. Legally, it's much more approved of than it was a few years ago. So urine testing is always the one that everyone goes to because it's already federally regulated, but oral fluid testing is way ahead of the game where it was 3 years ago, way, way ahead of the game. So, Bill, am I missing anything, or do you think I covered everything?
No, that was excellent. In fact, let me pose a couple of questions that we have here. One is, have you ever shown up at a location to do a drug test and they didn't know you were going to do oral fluid testing, and they were surprised that you showed up to do oral fluid instead of urine?
The donors have been. We keep a close relationship with our clients, so they always know what's coming. But the donors are often shocked. When we first started doing our large client, they had no idea. They called us the P wagon, and they said that, that's what they were expecting. So, we had all these people that really had to go to the bathroom, and they didn't tell us, they didn't know that they were just doing oral fluid testing. So, we'd send them to the bathroom, and then they came back and we did all the testing. So that happens to us frequently when we first start testing somewhere, that the donors have no idea. Now, obviously our clients are fully aware because it needs to be in their policy. They need to be, abreast of what kind of facility you need. You need tables rather than access to a restroom, for example.
Okay. And then the other thing that you brought up, which I think was very interesting, was, the protocols, having protocols in place for the testing system. So do you normally go through those protocols with your client ahead of time so they know everything that you're going to do? And do you know if they educate their employees on those protocols so that they know what's going on as well?
It's a combination of both.
We always go through it with our clients on the front end, but we also, before we do testing, we also talk to the group, or we talk to, the people that are getting tested, and so they're also abreast of what's going to happen when we're there. We always go through our new clients' policy with them and make sure that they are okay to do oral fluid testing based on their policy, and then we encourage them to educate, or I'll come out and educate. I've done 5 or 6 educations in the last 2 or 3 weeks where I've come out to a new client, presented their policy, and talked about how their testing is going to happen. And we explain, when we'll do oral fluid, when we'll do urine, when we'll do hair, how that protocol should look. We always want to make sure that a donor understands, what they can and cannot do, what their collector can and cannot do, because we don't want to be in a situation, we don't always, even though we have a client, we're not always the ones doing the collections. So we want to make sure that if they go to a different collection site or a different collector comes to them because we're unavailable or what have you, that the donor knows what to look for so that they're protected, so that the client knows how to look at a collector and make sure that the collector is doing the process correctly. That's part of being a designated employee representative, that you fully understand the process as well, so that if one of your clients, one of our donors is not treated properly or doesn't go through the proper protocol, that is seen and known and taken care of, so that you don't have these situations in the future.
And then one other question on the marijuana. You said that it really comes out to about the same numbers, and that in some cases you're actually getting more positives on the marijuana. Was that because of reasonable suspicion testing situations, or the ability to pick up the drug faster with oral fluid versus urine out? How's that work for you?
Well, it's critical when you're doing reasonable suspicion, because you can catch it immediately, especially if an employer has seen or smelled it. And so in those situations, reasonable suspicion situations, we've seen a higher rate of positives. When it comes to randoms, we see about the same. And when it comes to post-accidents, I think our statistics are also a little bit higher.
Okay, very good. Well, there are probably other questions that I know we're not going to be able to get to because we're running out of time, and I promised that I would take our audience through the return on investment, and we've got less than 2 minutes for that. Let me say to all of the audience, though, that if we didn't get to your question, please just let us know, or we've got it here, we'll respond to it, or somebody from OraSure or from Tana's office will respond to your question. But also, Jessica is going to send out information about how you can obtain these slides so that you can go through them a little bit slower, not so rushed as we've done today, and so that you can pick up on the return on investment slides. We're really out of time, and I apologize for that. I know some of you have to get back to work, but if you went through these, if we had a chance to go through these ROI slides and you compared the cost of urine testing to the cost of oral fluid testing as we did on this slide, typically urine testing is going to cost a little bit more. In some cases, it's not more. It's going to be right around the same or within $1 or $2. But then if you count the time that it takes to actually participate in the test, if you're sending workers to an off-site collection site where they're going to void a urine sample, we put in 1.5 hours as the average time gone. I know that it can be less than that sometimes, but oftentimes it's even more than 1.5 hours. And so depending on what the hourly rate is, and I haven't put in a fringe rate for what you're actually paying for that individual to be on your payroll, but just depending on the hourly rate of the worker, plus if it's a reasonable suspicion or a post-accident test, you're not going to send that individual to that off-site collection site alone. They're going to take a supervisor. It's going to take a supervisor's time as well. You add that in, and the cost to actually do the urine test is much higher than it would be with oral fluid. Now, Tana talked about the mandatory 10-minute wait time and then the 6 minutes on the other end of the test. It may take you, I've got 0.25, which is 15 minutes. It may take a little bit more than 15 minutes, but it's not going to be anywhere close to 1.5 hours or 2 hours. And so the actual time that individual is off the job, away from his desk or away from the assembly line or whatever, is going to be considerably less, significantly less with lab-based versus urine. And so you add those costs together, and you can see that the actual price that you're paying for a urine test is significantly higher than it is with an oral fluid test, and that may still be the way you want to go. It may not be the cost that you're concerned about. It may be that this is the testing method that's right for your company, and so you go with urine testing. But if you're concerned about cost, if you're concerned about drug test cheating, if you're concerned about some of those issues, or having that window of detection open up right away because you're in a safety-sensitive environment and reasonable suspicion or post-accident are very important to you, then you may want to consider oral fluid testing, because it addresses those issues. It addresses the issues that are sort of inherent with urine testing in a very positive and productive way with lab-based oral fluid testing. And as Tana emphasized, as those federal regulations come out for oral fluid testing, we'll see a lot more companies in and out of the mandate of the federal government looking at lab-based oral fluid testing, because those regulations will sort of give it an air of legitimacy that is there really because the technology and the science is sound, and as we saw, the state laws allow it, but still looking for that reassurance from the federal regulations. Those regulations are in the process of being developed, and so we're getting close to that time. Again, I want to thank Tana for sharing her comments, her wonderful insights, very unique. Thank you, Tana. And also, once again, thank OraSure Technologies for putting on these monthly webinars and for our audience today and joining us. And with that, I'll turn the microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Tana. And on behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope that you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Today's presentation is approved for 1 credit hour of continuing education from HRCI and SAPAC for CSAPAs. Please email me, Jessica Polk, at jessica@billcurrent.com. Jessica is spelled Jessica at BILLCURRENT, Jessica@billcurrent.com, if you are interested in receiving that credit. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.